Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Other Side of Addiction podcast. I am your host, Al Richards. We have a very special guest with us today from Arizona. We have Jennifer. Jennifer, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to be here with us.
Thank you so very much. I'm so honored to be here. It means the world to me.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much. And we've got a really kick butt topic that we're going to share. So today's topic is ambiguous grief. And I'm even shocked, which my wife could probably vouch for it. So my co-host today is my lovely wife, Jeananne Richards.
Hi.
So I'm surprised I could even pronounce the name ambiguous, right?
Yeah.
With the way my English is sometimes. Oh my gosh. So Jennifer, again, I'm so grateful and blessed that you found me and reached out to me and said, hey, you and I have a lot in common. And we ended up having a phone conversation, and we definitely do. And I just want to give a shout out to a tribe of giants with Nick and Ryan and all the many giants that's on that platform, because I have been able to meet a lot of amazing people because of that platform. And here I am. I have had the privilege now of meeting you and speaking with you. And again, it goes to show what their platform is doing, and helping people. So Nick and Ryan and everyone out at the Tribe of Giants, thank you so much for doing what you're doing to give people like Jennifer and myself and my wife, Jeananne, an opportunity to sit down and have a conversation and talk about something that for us means a lot. It really means a lot to us, and we believe it needs to be told. And we're just going to continue doing it until more and more people start hearing. So Jennifer, tell us a little bit more about yourself. What part of Arizona do you live in, I should say?
I personally live in the Peoria area of Arizona. I moved actually August 7th, marked 6 years since, been living here. I've been here 6 years now. I moved from the state of Pennsylvania, but I'm originally from Brooklyn, New York. I've lived in 5 states before settling down here in Arizona 6 years ago. And I love it here. You can't shovel sunshine. So
No, that's a good way of putting it. I like that. I'm going to have to write that down as just a side note.
I'm not like fond of 112 degrees, but remember what it was like to have frozen pipes and chipping ice off my car and all the things that go along with the Northeast. And as far as emotionally and mentally, being able to see the sun 99% of the time, that has really helped me in my emotional and mental well-being.
Yeah, I can imagine it would. And I've not ever lived in a place like New York or Chicago where you got a lot of the high rises and things like that. But knowing who I am as a person, I don't think I could live in a city like that to where I cannot look across the horizon and see mountains or see trees or see this. I mean, when you're in the city, right, you just look across and all you see is basically city. There's nothing else to see. Is that correct?
Pretty much. I mean, upstate New York, because I've lived in the city, and I've also lived in upstate New York. If you go upstate New York, because I never realized how like ginormous New York State is. It's like the 3rd largest, I think, in the United States. But it is very large. Cityscapes also can have a beauty all its own, but I'm with you. Like I'm still in awe of the sunsets that are Luna, and the mountains. And even though some people, like my brother, who's been living here for over about 20 years now, he's like, it's brown, it's a desert. I'm like, no. So the first year, the entire year, I made it a point to take pictures of all of the flora and fauna that actually is here in Arizona, and I would send them pictures. It has its own beauty, completely different than the Northeast. Northern Arizona, and the pine trees and, those kinds of atmosphere and landscape. like you have in like New York and Connecticut, because I've lived in Connecticut too. So yeah, every single day for a year. I sent him, see, it's not just brown. It's there's color here. You just have to know.
Yes, it is definitely beautiful. I lived in Phoenix, Arizona back in the 80s, early 80s, right out of high school. I was doing construction out there and I loved it out there. I mean, I really did. We'd go out every weekend and go out towards Wickenburg and go hunting all the time with dove and quail. And we spent a lot of time out in the desert, that's for sure. And you hit it right on the head when you said every place has its own beauty. And I do remember the incredible sunsets that were there. I used to sit out on our patio in this apartment complex that we lived in. We just had a perfect place to where you could just watch the sunsets every night. And yeah, definitely, definitely beautiful. So Jennifer, you and I have been going through kind of the same journey. I know that you shared with me that you battled addiction at one time in your life. And if I'm not mistaken with my notes, I believe you're 19 years sober now, which, oh my gosh, that is so incredible. And congratulations on that. And one thing I remember that you said, and where is it on my notes? So I remember something that really caught my attention, that when we had our phone conversation a couple of weeks ago, you felt like that you were born into the addiction. Am I correct, or did I misunderstand that?
Yes, the way I explain it is that like I literally from entering Earthside here, I was born into a family of addiction, of addiction, of abuse, of codependency. And this is in no way trying to slam my family. I've done a lot of work around all of that for more than 25 years, but my biological father, he was an alcoholic. He was a closet alcoholic. Although growing up, the memories I have of him, um, I never witnessed him like drunk. I never witnessed him. He didn't drink in front of my brother and I, but he also battled severe mental illness.
Mm-hmm.
Stepfather, who my mother was with for about 40 years, that's where I saw um, also mental illness on top of alcoholism. And then I have other family members, siblings, myself, we all in different ways and in different levels and severity of addiction, and if you move the substances aside, there was addictive behavioral patterns, there was codependency, which I didn't realize was an addiction all by itself until several years ago. And I started really diving into that, and what brought it to my attention more so in the last, I want to say 2.5, 3 years, is that I also am the mother of an adult child addict who is now presently in recovery, 60 days clean and sober. Because it wasn't until I was confronted with my being the parent on that's like because it's different. I haven't had a marriage. My oldest, my first husband, he was an addict, alcoholic. He says he has since deceased because of that. Um, and then my own, it's like it's one thing with a relationship of some like a friendship or a romantic kind of relationship. Presently, I can like detect that like 5 miles away, and I'm like, no, sorry, been there, done that. But when I was confronted, when I had no other choice but to admit to the fact that I have an adult child addict, he was 19 at the time, that's a whole different ball game. That's a whole different level all by itself. And I didn't realize just how codependent I truly was until I was confronted with that with my child who was
Yeah.
addicted.
And I remember going to only the few Al-Anon meetings that I went to, and everyone there, I was the only one that had a spouse, that was an addict. Everyone else had a child. And we've had a few guests on our show who have had children with the addiction.
Mm-hmm.
And, it was hard on my side. It was hard being a spouse. But one thing that somebody really brought to my attention, that I have a choice. I could leave that relationship. I don't have to be around it. But when it comes to your child, that's a tough one. I mean, it's got to be so tough, because I've really thought about it. If one of my daughters ended up becoming an addict, or and our grandkids, and let's pray it doesn't happen, and because it can happen to anybody, addiction doesn't care who you are, what you are. It hits every lifestyle. I just couldn't imagine throwing my hands up and saying, I don't want you anymore. I'm done. And separate that from your life. I mean, geez, it's got to be hard for you.
Yes, and it was, and okay, so I've been in and out of the rooms in various different ways, AA, Al-Anon, over the years for various different, times in my life. And I'm very grateful for the 12 steps. But if I go backwards, like my son just turned 32 this year. So if I go back to when he was 19 and the first thing, I'll never forget that day. It was a dark day for me, because it just became very crystal clear. And I think I probably knew, but just wanted to take a blind eye to it. But I can no longer deny that. And as soon as it sank in, I immediately started. I'm like, okay, I was married at the time. I'm not married anymore. I sat, my husband at the time down, and I said, listen, and I shared it with him. He was seeing it more than I was, or what I was, wanting to admit. But I'll never forget. And I said, we need to go to counseling like tomorrow, like now, because if we do not, this is going to destroy everything. And I've always said that, like you said, addiction is insidious and it will destroy everything in its
Yes.
path. And but the answer that I received was, no, everything will be fine. It'll be fine. And so right then and there, I just knew in my gut that I was on my own, which is a really horrible place to be when you are married, or with somebody in a committed, and something like this is, and it wasn't a biological child, it was a stepfather. And so I immediately started going back to, like, I needed some kind of support because I knew that I couldn't do this by myself. But I stopped going. Like, I didn't even go a second time, because the first thing, like, I went there, I know what the 12 steps and the rooms are about. And I was told several times to surrender, detach, and let go. And technically, ultimately, you do that. But that's not, number one, I was not willing to hear that. Number one, I'm not willing to. All I kept saying for a couple of years is, why isn't anybody listening to me? I just wanted to be heard. I didn't want someone to sit down with me and give me, like, all of these instructions and these rules on, because even though parents who have adult child addicts, we all have similarities in this horrific path, but each journey is unique unto itself. Each, person deals with different things. And I just felt like I wasn't being heard. And I'm like, you know what? I'll figure it out. And so I did, eventually, over time. But it is true. I couldn't just turn, because to me, surrendering, detaching, and letting go felt that I was turning my back on my child. And I couldn't do that. There was something in me that I couldn't do that until 2 years later. And it was a combination of my son's addiction and the behaviors that come with it, and hearing the pressures of family members and other people telling me to cut him off, is what I kept hearing, cut him off. And I threw him out of the house. And this had to, it was 2 days. Normally, when he was out and about, even if he was, drinking, getting high, whatever, he would always call me. As long as I knew, like, I knew what he was doing, which I didn't like, obviously, but he called me, but it was 48 hours and I had not heard from him. And I remember turning to my husband at the time, and he was 21, my son. I said, I'm waiting another 30 minutes and then I'm filing a police, missing person.
Yeah.
And within 20 minutes, he walked through the door, and something in me, I'm like, I can't do this. And I threw him out. And I will say this, the very moment I heard the door shut, because I gave him 24 hours to get his stuff and get out, my whole existence felt like it was crashing apart. Like I got sick. I wasn't eating, I wasn't sleeping. I had nightmares. That's when anxiety and panic attacks entered my life. Because now not only is my son an addict, but now he's homeless. Eventually he ended up being homeless. Him and a friend were living, we're staying in this abandoned home. And my husband at the time wanted no part of this. And it was just, no matter, I couldn't talk to the person because it would just cause fights, a lot of fighting. It was all this fighting because I just refused to give, I didn't want to give up, and he wanted me to let go, and I just wouldn't. And now I threw him out. But I think twice a week, I would let him and his friend come in so I can feed them, and he would take a shower. And so at least I knew I could do something. So fast forward, I don't remember how he came back into the house, but I do remember turning to my ex-husband. I said, I will never do that again. I will never, ever do that again. And so you can leave or stay, but this is the way it is. Because one thing I started to learn is to trust my gut, to trust that what I'm doing is right. And I just refused. I was like, I'm not turning my back. I'm not throwing him out. I'm not letting go, and I'll figure it out.
Yeah.
It has nothing.
And that was a hard part for me as well, because I had to kick Janan out quite a few times. And I've shared often that the time when I'd come home and she'd be drunk, and I finally got to the point where I was kicking her out. I always thought, and my mind worked the same way every single time. I would kick her out hoping I'd get some peace because of all the arguing and yelling and screaming and the anger and everything that was happening inside our household. And then I would shut the door and watch her walk away, stagger away, fall, and just this emptiness come over me going, what did I just do? And then my fear would set in and go, what if she runs across the wrong people? What if someone driving down the road, no one else, and they see her staggering, and they're one of those type of people that take advantage of people like that and grab her, use her for sex trafficking or whatever. I mean, all these things start going on in your head. And then when I wouldn't hear from her, the same thing, all these thoughts start going through my head. And then when I finally did hear from her, I'd have relief, but then that anger would set back in again. And it's like this constant yo-yo. You're battling with your emotions, and eventually it starts really taking a toll on you. I mean, really, really bad, and it's hard for any of us on the other side. And you mentioned you had people telling you, this is what you need to do. This is what you need to do. And I had the same thing once I started sharing. I had a lot of shoulds. You should do this or you should do that. And I did the same thing with her, but I've come to realize, and it took me quite a few years to figure it out. And, but it finally got to the point where I cannot tell her what she should do because I have no clue what she is going through. And people who are telling me, and I know they're doing it out of the kindness of their hearts, they're doing their best to help, but it's hard for somebody else who hasn't been on the other side to know what it's like. And also it's hard for us to take that advice.
It is. Listening to you, you know, outside of, what I shared with you with kicking my son out, what ended up happening is that ultimately he started working for the Renaissance festivals for almost 9 years. He traveled from state to state to state, working the Renaissance festivals. And when I share that, the most of the time the reaction is that, oh my God, that's so fascinating, that's so wonderful, it must be so much fun. Well, yeah, it is all those things, but what you don't know, dark side of fair life, the dark side of people who work at carnivals and circuses and festivals like this, I mean, it is dark. So a good chunk of the time it was through distance. So there was a part of me that was almost grateful that it was at a distance, but he would call me. And then of course, so what you were saying is that what I was hearing you say, there had come a point where I did end up taking a risk and letting him come live with me. I mean, I know I'm jumping around, but it's just what you're saying is that we don't know the other side.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there was a point right before I let him come back to live with me in 2020. It started getting his addiction started to progress to a point where he was now suicidal. And I don't know how I did it. I don't know. I can't even tell a person how this happened, but it clicked with me, at least that's why I say there's commonalities and there's differences. He started sending me these YouTube videos, these songs. And what I started to do, and it took a long time, I removed myself as the role of mom just for a short period of time so I can hear my son. So what he couldn't articulate, he would send it to me, he would send through song. And I'd listen to these lyrics, and I started to understand the other side.
Wow.
What's going on in this. When I look at people, even now, like now I cry happy tears and grateful tears because he's getting it and he's working a program. But when I see someone who has struggled or is in active addiction, there's a compassion that I have, which is the exact same as if it was my own child. They are not their addiction. That's not who they are.
Yes. Yep.
And it's so that's what you were sharing, is that it's hard. And I did back in 2021, in May of 2021, was the first time my son stepped into detox and rehab. And that was the first time since he was 21, because after the whole me kicking him out, there was a situation where he was willing to go to rehab, and that was a complete disaster, but which kept him from wanting to go or even willing to go to rehab over the course of from the time he was 21 until 2 years ago or last year. So I helped him. I set it up and everything. And then when he left to go to detox, I was sitting in my living room and I'm like, what now, Jen? Like, I literally sat there and I was talking out loud. I was by myself. I'm like, what now? Who are you if you are not taking care of your son? Who are you if you are not cleaning up vomit? Who are you if you are not fill in the blank? Because that's his addiction became my addiction.
Yes. Yep.
My
Amen.
whole life revolved around trying to fix, save, and rescue my son. And I have another child. So there's a lot of things that, fell by the wayside and I've had to make amends for, and there's so many different layers to this. It is a family disease.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it definitely affects everyone. A gentleman who actually ended up being my guest co-host at one time, he brought that to my attention. You know, he says, if you think about it, Al, you were addicted to your wife's addiction, and he nailed it. My life revolved around her addiction, 100% of it. Even when she was in jail, I was still living her addiction. And you would think that you finally got away from it, but you don't, because when you care and you love someone, it's not that easy to just go, I'm done. See ya. And I had this love for her that, you know, yeah, I wanted it to end. And I filed divorce 3 times and I canceled it 3 times because something kept drawing me back. And I knew she needed someone. I knew even in the depths of her addiction, as mean as she would get, but the time when she was out of it, I would see that woman again that I fell in love with. And again, also you nailed it too when you said the addiction's not them. It's just it's a mask that's put over them. It's hiding their true selves. And I would fall right back into that dark hole or get right back into the web and live. It's kind of like the Bill Murray movie Groundhog Day. It was almost kind of like a Groundhog Day, right? You relive the same steps over and over. It might be different places, but you're still living it day to day.
Absolutely. You know, you mentioned it being a mask, and how if I were to describe, and I've told this to people, addiction doesn't matter a person's faith or what their path is. If they're ever, I mean, there's a lot of evils in the world. I know this, but to me, Satan or the devil is addiction. It's
Yeah.
not. It's not the depiction that we have been growing up like with the guy with the horns and everything. No, no. You know, it's that's if there is such a thing as the devil or Satan, it's addiction, and
Yeah.
that's exactly how I see it. You know, and it's like I said, it's insidious and it will destroy, and it destroys like just listening like the music that my son would send me. And see, I also, with not just the music, so there was a moment in time, there was a month, it was a whole month, he was very suicidal, and I knew this. And but he was in a different state, and so there was only so much I could do. But what I did do, and I made him promise me that he was going to wait for my phone call. So every morning I would text him to check in, and then I would go to work, and then I would come home, and this became my like routine for a while. I would get home, I would make whatever. If I was hungry, I'd ate. If not, most of the time I didn't, but I would make like tea or something. I would set myself up. I pulled out my son's favorite book, and I would call him and I would just start reading. I started
Wow.
reading to him until I knew that he either fell asleep on the phone or it was safe for me to let him, hang up. Um, and I did that for about a month, and I don't regret it. These are the things, I don't care what anybody, like we were saying, I'm like, I'm sure some, they were good intentions, but I just, when I made a decision and committed to that decision to trust my gut, and with my son, I didn't ever veered from it. But I will say this about Al-Anon. When I stepped back into Al-Anon in 2021, May 12th, actually, because that was also the day that my son, the night before, May 11th, he went to detox, and then May 12th, I knew that I had to do something. So that was familiar to me. I started to actually work the 12 steps. I worked through the steps. I was working with a sponsor. I was doing all the things because I just needed to understand. And like you were saying, I walked in there because all I wanted was peace. I was so desperate for peace. And so what it was a respite for a while. But it also allowed me to focus on my own self, my self-care that had nothing to do with my son. What it also did is it started to develop a foundation, a spiritual foundation that I never had before. And that also was a part of finding the peace within myself. And the more I followed that, um, the more peace would come to me. And then, but there was still this, and it was there even before. There was this heaviness in my system. There was a heaviness in my chest. There was a pain that I was carrying, which is obvious for anybody who has been affected by someone's, addiction. But even with all the peace, I just couldn't understand, because I could be doing mundane things and I would just burst into tears, like out of nowhere. It's like, where is this coming from?
Yeah.
When he came out of rehab, all 3 times, and this third time, like first of all, I would have that rush of fear that would come back, and it's like I was too focused on whether he was going to relapse or not, and I've learned how to then since shift that. But what I also realized more than anything is, what is this heaviness? Like, what is this? And it literally was right before I spoke with you a couple weeks ago. I don't know how I don't remember how I came across it, honestly. It's grief. It's a type of grief that I was carrying around, but it was a kind of grief that I couldn't talk to anybody because they wouldn't understand. You know, you're grieving for someone who's still alive,
Yeah.
and that's where I discovered the term ambiguous grief. And when I discovered that, it's as if almost the grief started to lift, because I'm not one for labels, but when you're going through something and you don't know what it is, and then you find, like, you're not like you I kept telling close people, I was like, I'm not crazy. I know that I'm just not an Eeyore kind of a person. I know that I'm a happy kind of go lucky person, but there was this heaviness, this sadness, this grief that I was carrying and didn't realize that that's what it was. And so as soon as I discovered it, I've been able to unpack that and work with it and talk about it. And it just makes it more real. Like, not that it wasn't real. It just makes it more like I'm not crazy.
Yeah.
Because you feel like that. Like, I mean, this whole journey, it can make you feel like you're going insane.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll second that motion. That's for
Yeah.
sure. I mean, I felt like I was just carrying around a ball and chain continuously, and I don't know how it was for you, Jen, but for me, I would put on this fake facade. I did a lot of networking, and I've always done a lot of networking. And when she was in the depths of her addiction, I walk into a room and I'm full of energy and I'm going around and smiling and I'm hugging everybody and talking to them or seeing new faces, introducing myself, thinking that I'm putting on a pretty good show. But people who knew me, who really knew me, started pulling me off to the side going, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "Yeah, man, I'm great. Why? Why do you ask?" And they're like, "You're just not the same person. There's something going on." And I didn't even tell my mom that Janan was battling addiction. And she, as a mom, could sense it pretty well. She'd be like, "What's going on? Is everything okay?" "Oh, yeah, everything's great." Even all the times when she was in jail, I come up with some kind of story. So again, basically, it's like the stories Janan would throw at me when I'd say she was drinking and no, she's not drinking. Or if I did catch her drinking, this was the reason why I'm drinking. I'm coming up with my own stories as well to cover my emotions and to hide what I'm going through. And I did not realize what a toll it was taking on me. I mean, I had no clue until the day I have shared this many times that I was coming home from a networking group and I made my mind up. I'm going to go home and get my pistol and I'm done. I cannot do this anymore. And I also was thinking in the wrong way, going, if I take my life and she's fine, if she finds out I take my life, and I'll make sure it's in the letter or whatever it is that I leave to let people know that I'm hoping this will get her to stop. And it's so crazy how our minds start thinking, you know, we are really in, like you said, we're in the addiction with them 100%. And no matter how hard we try to dust it off or throw them out or, you know, clean our hands of them, it's not that simple. It doesn't happen.
No, no. I've had moments, and I did the same thing. You know, I did the same thing. I, you know, wore a mask that everything's okay, and that I, you know, a lot of people didn't know. And I think, well, not that I think, I know that part of that for most people is the stigma that um, goes along with addiction and mental health or mental illness. There's an addiction because, I mean, a good majority of people who are in detox and rehab, that's dual diagnosis. There's something that's underneath. It could be general anxiety disorder, it could be PTSD, it could be, you know, bipolar, whatever it is, a lot of trauma and stuff like that. And so I would put on, I wouldn't tell anybody. And those people closest to me, unfortunately, were not, they tried to be as supportive as they could because they really, you know, what I would hear is that, you know, there's nothing you can do.
Mm.
Now, now I logically, I knew that. Logically, I understood that there's literally nothing I can do. He has to want recovery. Addiction is not a choice. Nobody would choose. Nobody in their right mind would choose addiction, but recovery is a choice.
Yeah.
And so those around me, they knew and they understood the journey that I've had, you know, with my son and what, you know, what happened, you know, with his biological father and stuff like that, because there was a lot of trauma and abuse in that at my son at a very young age. So I also was carrying a lot of guilt for a lot of things. I
Mm-hmm.
blamed myself. Like if I would have done A, B, or C sooner, then my son wouldn't be going through this. He wouldn't be addicted. It's not that black and white. And it, like you said, it took years, and it hasn't been since until like the last a couple of years that I've started, the pieces are starting to come together for me and understanding. And, you know, part of protecting my peace is creating boundaries that are non-negotiable.
Yeah.
You know, the parameters that I had to make my own self-care a priority, because if I didn't do that, then I'm useless. You know, I can't do all the things. I also had to face my enabling, like how I enabled his addiction, all of my own behaviors and things, like the lying or giving him money or, you know, keeping him, because I was doing those things because I was afraid. I didn't want him out of my sight because I was afraid. I walked around with a constant 24/7 fear that I'm going to get that phone call from the cops or someone to tell me that my son is OD'd and is dead. And I couldn't, I couldn't live with that. I had to do something. I always felt like I had to do something. I had to keep an eye on him until one day I was at work, and I had not had a full blown panic attack until that particular day. I literally, I all of a sudden I felt like there was like a vice grip or something that was closing in on my, like somebody was squeezing my lungs, or, and I couldn't catch my breath, and it brought me to the floor, and I just started begging God. I'm like, I don't know what I did wrong, but you could take me and make sure that my son is okay, and I'll go, and all that. That's what I was saying. just take me. Just, I don't want to live anymore. I don't want to deal with this anymore. But if you take me, can you please make sure that my son is okay? You know, um, and at that breaking point is when, things started to kind of, I was in Al-Anon, like I was kind of doing little bits here and there. But that was a breaking point, a transition point for me where I had to do something.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I'm going to die.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm glad that you brought that up. And I loved when you and I had our conversation a week or 2 weeks ago about the ambiguous grief. And I looked up the definition for it, and I had down the unclear or inexact because a choice between alternatives has not been made. And I don't know if that's what you have down on your sheet, but that's just kind of what shows. So what is it that you have on your side? Because I really want our audience to understand more of what this really means.
Yes, so I did a little bit of research, and I did write down just so it can be very clear. Now, ambiguous grief. A woman by the name of Pauline Boss, B as in boy, OSS, she coined the term ambiguous loss slash grief. She's also the author of the book, The Myth of Closure. Um, and she was the first to research the so-called, and I'm just reading the notes that I have, so because it's very clear, so it can be very clear. She did research on the so-called normal American family of the post-war era. In other words, there was often an absent father, alive but not present. And so with ambiguous grief, there's two types of ambiguous grief. Um, Here, I just want to make sure that, yes, okay, so there's two types. The first type is physical absence with a psychological presence, which is what I just shared.
Mm-hmm.
And examples of that kind of ambiguous grief is like the airplane that disappears, or the kidnapped child, or the natural disaster that wipes lives away. So there's a physical absence. This is the kind of grief that both types, it does not give any clear, like you said, any closure or clear understanding. There's no emotional closure, because if, when someone dies close to us, mother, significant other, child, whatever, even though it might be a shock to the system, we understand, it's very clear that death has occurred. So ambiguous grief is there is no closure. The second type of ambiguous grief is psychological absence with physical presence. That includes things like divorce, mental illness, aging such as Alzheimer's, dementia, addiction. So we're grieving someone who's still alive. They are physically present, but psychologically they are absent. And with those kinds, it's like speaking of addiction, because that's what we're here for.
Yeah.
Um, is that we are grieving the person they once were, the person that we remember, or the glimmer that happens when they are sober for and clean and sober for a certain amount of time, and they come back, the person that we know. So we're grieving the person and the relationship that once was, that is no more, that has changed. I mean, it's a complicated form of grief because this kind of ambiguous grief delays the grieving process. A lot of the information that I found, it talks a lot about, Alzheimer's. So but a divorce also. And the thing about ambiguous grief, if we're talking about someone with Alzheimer's or dementia or addiction, well, a lot of times people, when we try to talk about this kind of grief or what we're going through, a lot of times we'll hear like, well, at least they're still alive.
Yeah.
Well, they can choose recovery. And what ends up happening is that we end up withdrawing, going inward. We feel isolated and alone. And that almost, for me, it's almost like, am I wrong for feeling this? Am I crazy? You know, and I'm here to say that it's normal. It's normal. Like my son, like I did a post on Instagram about a year or so ago, a picture that I saw of him 5 years ago, and he was in active addiction at the time. Is sharing with people, does this look like the addict? Like what, people have a stereotype of what an
Yes.
addict or looks like,
Mhm.
and my grieving was, the little boy who loved archaeology and who loved art and who loved chess and I could go on and on. Like, that's a grief. That's grief. Whether it's a child or a spouse or a parent, even, if you had a certain amount of time with that person before the addiction took hold, and so now everything is in chaos and everything has changed because of this addiction. They aren't the person we know. That's grief. And we have every right to feel, and it's the same thing almost with people, and I hear it from my son, people who are in recovery grieve their addiction.
Yeah.
Mhm.
If that's all they ever knew, and now they have to learn how to live life on life's terms and learn a new way of being, there is a grieving process. So it is a complicated kind of grief on both sides. And it's normal. It's normal. And there was a quote, it can feel like an ongoing trauma because there is no answer or no closure.
I like
With
that.
Yes, it's like we're re-traumatizing, we're replaying. And that's what I was doing.
Mhm.
I from nightmares, all kinds of nightmares, and like even when I sat there and I was like, well, who am I if I'm not taking care of my addicted adult child? Because even there's a grieving process when they are in recovery, and so now I'm in a place where, and now my mindset has shifted because I have a spiritual foundation and because I have a higher power, and because of that, that's very key in how I'm able to move forward and respect my son's path, and to not fall back into old behaviors, because there is also a grieving of being the enabler, of being that person, to be there to pick up the pieces and to, all that stuff while they were in active addiction, and now they're not. And so now we're so used to them being a certain way, it can be very complicated. Grief is not black and white, just like
Yeah.
addiction is not black and white.
Yeah.
That is so cool that you put those two together, Jennifer. I mean, seriously, that it really is, because yeah, it's two peas in a pod. I mean, it seriously is. And I had my own journey, and I wished I would have kind of come to that point where you did and how you had it figured out. Unfortunately, my journey was not unfortunately, my journey was my journey. I had to go through what I needed to go through to get where I'm at today. And we've had guests on the show with some of the things that you shared earlier about the ambiguous grief. We've had people on our show that straight A students all through school, never got in trouble. I mean, honor rolls, all that stuff. And then all of a sudden one day they fall into the addiction. And as they start going through therapy and they start learning more about themselves, some of it has been the abandonment, of my father left me when I was 4 years old. Never saw him again. I didn't realize it was eating me up inside. And then finally I had to let it out somehow, some way. So I chose alcohol, or I chose a drug, so
Or they couldn't hold it in anymore, and so they wanted to mask it with something else.
yeah.
That kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. It has a lot of different faces. That is for doggone sure. Wow.
I can totally relate to what you were talking about with your son, because I've kind of been going through that myself with my son. So I got sober last December 2020. So it was 20 months yesterday, 2 days ago.
Yeah. 2
And
days ago.
right after I got sober, we had a Christmas dinner kind of thing at a restaurant, and my son came, and my daughter was there, and her husband, and my son's girlfriend. And I told him, that I was sober and that to please, keep in touch with me, to let me know how he's doing and stuff like that. Was he was doing meth for a few years, and then he when he was in Tennessee with his previous girlfriend, and then when he came home, he stopped doing the meth, but he was still doing pot, smoking pot. And I said, just keep in touch with me. I want to know you're alive and you're okay and everything. And I figured the reason why we weren't talking is because of my drinking and how I was whenever I was around him or whenever he was around, that he just couldn't deal with that. Because my son's one of those kids that just are really keep to themselves, keep their feelings to themselves, and they don't know how to cope with things and things like that. Both my kids were older when I got into my addiction, so I don't feel like a lot of the things that they've gone through are because of my addiction. They might have been because of other things that I did with them when they were younger, and I was a single mom also for most of their lives. And so when we left that night, I thought, he listened to me, he promised me, and I'm going to start hearing from him at least once a week, and no such luck. He gave me his number, and I tried to call it various times throughout at least the first 6 months. Then I finally started giving up, and just, every once in a while I would, send him something on instant message or something like that. And it took a little over a year, but I finally called him at work, and I said, because I just couldn't not talk to him. I couldn't just sit around. I was like you were saying, ambiguous grief, because it was so intense. And I felt that way, but I didn't know what I was feeling. I just felt like I told Al numerous times, I'm like, I feel like he died, but he hasn't died, because he was just not a part of my life. And growing up, he was like my baby boy. We were like so close that he wouldn't even, like Al likes to joke about, when we first got together and we went to a restaurant, my son wouldn't even order his own food. And he was probably 8 or 9 at that time. He wouldn't even order his own food. I always ordered it for him. So that's what he was used to. And he was incredibly shy. So we were way close. And then when he was about 14, I had him go live with his dad for a month so I could go to rehab, my first rehab. And I figured that's what really blew up our relationship, and but I was struggling for the last year to get a hold of him. Finally, this year in February, I called his work, and they brought him onto the phone, and he answered, and I'm like, "Hi, Kyle, it's Mom." And he was like, he just sat there, nothing. And then he says, "Hi." And so we ended up talking, and we got things on good terms again. And then some other things happened that I don't want to talk about on the air, but he stopped talking to me again a month later. And it's just like this time, I just said, you know what? Whatever's going to happen is going to happen. I trust in God, and just to let it happen, because I can't go through that again. I can't keep putting myself through this grief and this pain that my kids want to inflict on me. Right now, I'm not speaking to either one of my children, and I know they're out there. My daughter's now about 7-8 months pregnant with their first child, and my son his wife just had their first child May 29th. And so I have 2 grandkids out there, or one on the way, that I have never seen, and I don't know when I will see them again. And it's still a painful thing, but at least I'm at that point where I'm looking at like the bright side, looking out for myself. You know, I have to treat myself good and not let this hurt me. And I know that my self-care is important to me, and I got to have that. So I have got to just kind of put them over here while I'm still, you know, because I'm, 20 months sober. So I don't want to have any reason to drink. And if I deal with those issues that I have with my kids, I'm going to drink. And so, but it's painful. It's very painful that being that close and then him not wanting to talk to me and not knowing if he's alive or if, you know, something horrible happened to him. That year was just, it was the hardest thing I've ever been through. So I really relate to you on that.
Yeah. Hearing you speak, it reminds me of it. There's two things now that, and I've said this to my son. I said, your recovery, that is who you are now. So you need to tell, and I won't say the exact word because him and I can talk pretty freely. You need to tell every person, place, and thing to pretty much buzz off.
Yeah.
I said, this is who you are. This is this has to be the center, which is what I'm hearing from you is the, and I even told him, including me, don't worry about me. Don't worry if you're going to call me or not, or text me or not. Just focus on your recovery. Do whatever it takes. One moment, one day at a time. I said, so don't worry. So because you don't want to, and it's easier said than done. He's learning a lot of lessons. And then the other thing, what you mentioned about the grief part and the whether they are, we know that they're physically alive. Otherwise, and we pray that we don't get that phone call and so on and so forth. But the sponsor, this was a year ago, beginning of this year, excuse me. I was talking to my sponsor, and she said, you have to remember something. She's like, addiction is stronger than you, but God is stronger than addiction. And I had never heard that before. So I really, it clicked with me. I'm like, okay. And then I was in the same conversation. I said, okay, if that's the case, how do you explain overdoses? How do you explain, any of that? And what she said to me has stayed with me. And then, I had to come to a place of acceptance, kind of like you were saying, you have to concentrate on your sobriety and your recovery. What she said is that sometimes the addiction is so strong, it's too strong, and God needs to bring his children home. And I didn't like hearing that, but I had to come to a place of understanding and accepting that could be a possibility. Not that that's not what I'm, focusing on, and that's not what I want, but that one little conversation really helped me put things kind of in perspective. But it doesn't take the grief away.
No.
It doesn't take fears away.
Right.
I've had to learn to, I've had to learn what true surrender and letting go truly is. If left to my own devices, I would probably just strangle my poor son, meaning because of my fears and everything. And I don't I remember the night that he went into the hospital for detox, his most recent time. And I've never done this the other two times. I drove him and I was getting him ready. We were in the parking lot of the hospital. And I just looked at him and he was drunk and he was high and he was just stumbling and stuff. But he was coherent enough for me to talk to him. I just lost it. And I grabbed him by the collar and I was begging him to please, 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 please make it click this time. Please, you shouldn't be here, meaning he shouldn't be alive. but he was. And I just was holding on to, that's what I was saying. I was holding on to dear life, and I was hugging him as if, in case this is the last time I get to hug you, the last time I get to look at you. And and I didn't care whether he was drunk, and it's hard to describe, but that's, and I think, and he does remember that moment in the parking lot, because he'd never seen me that way. I try to be, like you said, I try to have the mask that I'm strong, and I'm going to take care of this, and you just have to do, A, B, and C, step one, step two,
Yeah.
and I just lost it that night.
I feel your pain, and I want to touch on that just a little bit when we're going to take a quick commercial break, but I definitely want to touch on that, because when you were talking about dropping your son off in that, man, flashbacks just started happening to me. I mean, one right after another. So guys, stay with us. We've got some more really great stuff to share with you. So we'll be right back.
Have you ever been in a car accident? Do you know what to do after being in a car accident? Are the insurance companies going to take care of you? Hi, I'm attorney Rick Heaton with the Law Office of Bobby Udall. I will help you through the process and answer all of these questions. I give every single client my cell phone so they can talk to me whenever they need. Let me deal with the insurance company so you can focus on getting better from your injuries. Call me at 385-330-0226. Again, my cell phone number, 385-330-0226. Don't call the insurance company first. Call attorney Rick Heaton at 385-330-0226.
This is Gregory, owner of Lift Up Concrete, proudly serving the Wasatch Front for the last 12 years, lifting sunken flatwork for both residential and commercial applications. Only fully trained professionals lifting concrete at your residence with the same quality of material and method used at every commercial job we ever do. Don't replace it, lift it. liftupconcrete.net, 801-792-4535. Contact us at liftupconcrete.net, or if you're looking for a complimentary quote, 801-792-4535. Again, 801-792-4535. Again, this is Gregory, Lift Up Concrete Lifting.
Hello, my friends. This is Brad Neufeld, and I want to thank you for tuning in to the Resilience Talk Network. You can listen to my show, Resilience, every morning, Monday through Friday at 8 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. On my show, we will be discussing what it takes for you to overcome the day-to-day challenges that all of us face in life, as well as some of the devastating ones that may lead us to feelings of hopelessness and despair. It's my goal to provide you with the tools and skills that you need to overcome anything that is thrown your way. To find out more about my show, visit our website at www.resiliencetalk.com. That's www.resiliencetalk.com. And as always, until we meet again, go for everything that you want in life and make it happen.
Hey everyone, welcome back to The Other Side of Addiction. Again, I'm your host, Al Richards, and I am here with two amazing women. We have our special guest out of Arizona. We have Jennifer. Jennifer, again, thank you so much for being with us today and taking time out of your day. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And my lovely wife, Jeananne, who was able to be the guest co-host today. I don't know how some of this works out, but it always just seems to work out. And it seems like the guest co-hosts that come on the show, it's the spirit or it's God in work, because it always seems to fit perfectly with who our guest is. It's so amazing how it lines up. So right before we went to commercial break, and we're going to get in more into this ambiguous grief, but Jennifer was saying something about how society, you know, they look at the addicts in that and they think that's who that person is, when really they're not. And I've seen a lot of before and after pictures of people going, oh my gosh. There were people that I had networked with for quite a few years that when I started sharing my story, pulled me off to the side and said, hey, I don't want you to share this, but I feel comfortable talking to you, but I don't know if you knew, but I used to be an addict. I'm like, what? Are you shitting me? No way. And I've gone to AA meetings with her for support and ran into people that I know from networking. And I'm like, the heck are you doing here? You know, and then they've shared one of quite a few things that I have learned from starting this podcast and sitting down with the people that I've sat down and interviewed from really all over the world now. I mean, from Europe to Canada, here in the United States, people who go through the addiction and they come out of it. I tell you what, you want to hang around these people. And the reason why is because they are the inspiration for others to know that it's possible. And you said God takes those who the addiction has such a grasp on them. He's taken them away from that. You know, he's given them that peace because it's got such a hold on them. But there are so many people who have gone through addictions and just have been through the darkness of hell and have come out, and they are sharing so many incredible things and helping so many people. And I made the comment with some people that I was around last week. We're all LDS in our family, but I look at myself as being more spiritual than anything. And I was telling this person that I was talking with, I says, if you go back and you look or even watch the Jesus movies, every single one of Jesus's disciples that he asked to follow him, were they perfect? Every single one of them had issues. And look what they became. And I look at people who battle addiction now, who have come to the other side. That's how I see them. I think they're the disciples now, not saying that, you know, I'm not trying to take away from anything from the Bible or anything like that, but really they're like a disciple. They're going out now and they're teaching other people who have gone through the same struggles. And people like yourself, Jennifer, I mean, you've been on both sides. I mean, you really have. And having your son going through what he's gone through, now you're like a disciple in a way, because now you're helping people who are on the other side understand a little bit more and know the paths, because both you and I have shared the mistakes we have made, and we've both made so many. I had to learn how to forgive myself before I was able to forgive her, because I spent so much time blaming her for everything, just like she was blaming her addiction on whatever demon she was dealing with. And I finally woke up one day, and it was thanks to prayer, fasting, and listening and going, you know what? This word forgiveness keeps popping up. And I wasn't ready to forgive her. No way in hell I was ready to forgive her. And it finally dawned on me, it was me that I needed to forgive. And once I forgave myself, forgiving her was a piece of cake, where I wasn't ready for it before. So yeah, I just wanted to share that before we get into more of this ambiguous grief.
So we left off before about her talking about how that one last time you took him to detox and how he was feeling. Was there something you wanted to add on to that?
Yeah, I did. And thanks, babe, for bringing that up. You know, when I dropped Jan off at detox for the very last time, I was so angry in that I just said, you can go in by yourself. I'm not going in. I literally almost in a way grabbed her crap, threw it out on the lawn, the side of the curb, probably yelled at her. Pretty sure I did. Jumped back in the car and took off and was watching her in the rearview mirror, watching her struggle to even bend down because she was so drunk to pick up her bags. And I remember just bawling, just flipping bawling and slamming my hand down on the steering wheel over and over and over and over, thinking, this is the last time I'm going to see my wife alive. That's the feeling that I was getting. And you brought back those memories when you were sharing what you were sharing right before the commercial break. And even when I got home, every time that phone rang, I could feel the blood rush to my feet, thinking, this is the call. This is the call. This is what we go through. And you said earlier in the show, it's a family disease. This is why it's a family disease, is because it takes everything. It takes everything. And it's so sad that it does. And I remember speaking with Janan's mom once when she was in recovery. I think she was actually in jail. And her mom said, maybe it would be better if she did pass, because then she wouldn't be fighting anymore. She wouldn't have the battle. And it was so hard for me to understand. This is her mom saying this, but her mom knew about addiction because her husband went through it. And in a way, there was times I was actually even hoping that would happen. You know, going, at least she's not suffering and having the pain anymore. And then also thinking very selfishly, I got to throw that in, being very, very selfish, going, I'm going to be free. Would I have been free? No, I wouldn't have been free. So again, that's the grasp that addiction has on everyone that's around it. So thanks, babe, for bringing that up.
Yeah.
If I knew you were going to be talking about my mom again, I wouldn't do it.
Oh,
Wouldn't have done it.
apologize. Okay, what were you going to say, Jennifer?
No, I was listening to you. The phone calls, what you said about that's the last time that you were going to see her alive. See, because that night that I was standing there begging my son to please make this work, you know, please. I just kept saying, please, I beg of you, I beg of you. Please get well. I just want you well. I just want you well. That's all I kept repeating, because a few weeks prior, and I did get permission, because I did ask my son what I can and cannot share, because I respect him. And he said, he gave me carte blanche. That's why I've been able to open. Several weeks before, I got a phone call. Now we were talking about, you know, getting that dreaded phone call. Well, what I ended up getting is a phone call from my son. He kept trying to get a hold of me. Now I didn't hear my phone. I don't know, but he ended up reaching a mutual friend. And I really believe there are no coincidences. There are no accidents. Everything is in, you know, God has his hand in this. I really believe that I wasn't supposed to connect with my son until when I finally did, because what my son shared with me. Now, I shared earlier in the interview about a couple before him coming to live with me. I was on the phone every day, you know, because he was very suicidal. Well, what I found out is that, you know, he went out and he purchased a gun, and the day he called me, the night before that, I won't get into graphic detail, but what I will say is he pulled the trigger, but when he pulled the trigger, the entire gun locked. And as soon as he told me, the first things out of my mouth is that God loves you and wants you here.
Yeah.
You're meant to be here. It's not your time. And that is when it took maybe a week or so to finally get to rehab. And when he called to me to ask for help, and I'm sure you've heard this, when an addict reaches out and says, I need help, take me, there's a small window of opportunity to get them to the help that they are requesting. So I made it a point to get him out of where he was, and that was the night at the hospital. And like you were saying, I kept saying, I don't know, maybe it's because I just was so used to playing the role of martyr. I don't know. I guess maybe that might be it, is that I would always ask God to take me, because I didn't want my son to hurt anymore. Because I would always say, if I can go in and take out all of the pain and all of the suffering, I would in the blink of an eye, so you wouldn't have to suffer. But what I've learned is that robs them of their own healing.
Yeah.
It robs them to understand. And so now, he's gearing up to make amends. He's on that step of where we make amends. And he's like, as long as you're not emotional. I was like, well, you need to give me some time so I can like let it all out, and then I could, present. But that when you were sharing that is what and that's why I tell people, my son shouldn't be alive right now, but he is, because he has a purpose here. And what you were saying, my favorite community of people are those in the addiction recovery community, because of exactly what you shared. There is such a stigma against addiction and mental illness.
Yeah.
And if people were to really take a step back, their doctor, their lawyer, their plumber, anybody, there is no stereotype. It isn't the quote derelict under a bridge, although there might be, people like that as well. But addiction does not discriminate.
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't discriminate. And like I said earlier, and I stand very firm in my belief that addiction is not a choice. It's not a choice. And statistically, there are more people in recovery. Unfortunately, it doesn't sell enough papers. It doesn't make enough money. We're so conditioned to put our attention to all of the dark, and that needs to be said, that needs to be shared. But what about celebrating recovery? Let's talk more about getting to the other side, like your podcast, more people talking about, like you were saying, these disciples, they have a voice, they have experiences to share, and it's to let those people who are now in the deep, dark recesses of addiction, that there is hope and that there is another side. It just needs to be about more.
Amen. They are actually the inspiration, that's for sure. Kate.
Okay.
Yes, so they are the inspiration. I mean, really, they are. I think it's just so flippin' cool. And I say all the time how honored I am to come into the studio and be with them. And we coined a new phrase on the morning show. We had a guy that was in here who is a retired psychiatrist, and we talked about mental health, what you just touched on. We had really great conversation, and coming into the studio every Thursday, Jennifer, it's my therapy. I mean, really, it is. This is my therapy. And my buddy TJ, who was the guest co-host, coined it. He goes, yeah, therapy Thursdays. And I went, oh my gosh, I didn't even put those two together. So yeah, we've kind of got this new thing now. We're going to call it Therapy Thursdays. But anyways, all right, to get back on track again, because gosh, we've been going for quite a while already. We've almost been into this for like 2 hours, I think, getting in there or getting close. You wanted to share a little bit more about the ambiguous grief. So what was it that you wanted to touch base on?
So what I wanted to share is, I'm going to recap just so, because I know we've been talking about so many different things. Ambiguous grief or ambiguous loss, again, is a loss that occurs without a significant likelihood of reaching emotional closure or a clear understanding. And because of that, it leaves a person searching for answers, thus delays the grieving process. So when we are in this very complicated kind of grief, like I've shared, earlier, the two types, the one that it has physical absence with psychological presence, which is like a kidnapping, a natural disaster, etc. That's one type of complicated ambiguous grief. The other one is the psychological absence with physical presence, which is divorce and addiction and aging and mental, illness. But so the thing is that now when I discovered that what I was feeling, like I wasn't crazy, and I just kind of had was able to put a name to what it is that I was experiencing. What can we do? Well, number one, first and foremost, I always tell people, because I myself, I'm not a therapist, I'm not a counselor, but to seek someone, it's a grief counselor, to talk to someone, whatever that might look like, whatever kind of, therapy or counseling or healing, whatever it is, but somebody who is schooled in grief. But there are things we could do. And I wrote down just a little bit. Remember that the present doesn't override the past, which is easier said than done. The present does not erase the past, it doesn't change who they were. Meaning when we are grieving someone who's still alive, addiction changes a person, but it doesn't erase the past. It doesn't erase who they are. And like you were saying earlier, about the gentleman who was 5 years, has 5-year chip, and taking the chip away or whatever it was.
Yeah.
That's one thing. Now, don't get me wrong, I love 12-step groups. It is not for everyone. I'm now, it's done its job for what it needed to do for me. But the one thing I do not agree with is that when someone like my son, who has worked so hard, whether it's 30 days or 60 days or 10 years, and let's say there was a slip up after getting your 5-year or 10-year or whatever chip, does it erase all of the work that you've done in the past? No, it doesn't.
Right.
It's the same thing. The present doesn't erase or override the past when we are in this kind of grief. Even if their actions and words presently are difficult and or hurtful, even if the relationship has changed, this doesn't change who they are and the relationship you had. They are not their addiction. When, if we can just, and I know it's easier said than done when they are inactive addiction. I'm not condoning and saying that it's okay for whatever's going on. And that's where our own self-care has to come into play, and boundaries need to be set. And what that looks like would be different for everyone. Like for me, my son does not have my address. He doesn't know where I live. He can't live with me anymore. Like I had to put very, very specific, boundaries. I'm learning to have a healthier relationship with my son as a parent and child. But it'll never erase, even through the darkest depths of his addiction, where I became fearful and all. I still, when I looked into his eyes, I knew who he was. That's my child, so that's where this is something we can do. And we cherish the positive memories. Like we cherish those. We journal write. We can create a scrapbook of old photos to honor them and the relationship. So it's just really honoring. Because it's really hard when someone's in active addiction, but then when they are in recovery, that's also a transition, because they're not the same person they were prior, prior to getting into.
Yeah.
So this is a transitional period. And there's grief that can go with a person who's in recovery, can grieve their addiction. Now we are learning to transition and relate to that person in a different way, in a healthier way. But there's a lot of stuff going on, and it's just honoring our memories, honoring them, honoring the person, like whether it's a spouse or it's a parent, it's about honoring and just understanding, the present doesn't erase the past. Secondly, is understand that the illness isn't the person. I was just saying that.
Mm-hmm.
Acknowledging the grief and pain of the loss. Although this complicated grief often is overlooked, it is important to honor the loss and grief. So that is where I was talking about in the very beginning. All I needed and all I was searching for is to be heard, to be seen, to someone to say, I understand. I don't want you to fix, save, or rescue me. Please just sit there and listen. And if that
Yeah.
means I have that, don't give me a roadmap. I'm not ready for that right now. In time, I was ready. And it's the same thing if the flip side, my son, when I removed the role of mom and I just listened to the songs he was sending me, I started to hear him. And it's really hard when we are in the throes of fear, and all of the other things we were talking about. Be open, like when they're in recovery, now they're in recovery, be open to this new relationship and what it can offer, what we didn't have before. Because that addiction might have been stirring underneath this whole time. It was just a matter of time where the switch was going to be flipped.
Yeah.
And the addiction takes hold. And then connect to others who can relate. And that can be hard too, because like I was saying earlier, if I use the example, for example, like Alzheimer's, someone who has an aging parent, a lot of times we hear, be grateful they're still alive. And people mean well. I do believe that people mean well. But when we are in the middle of watching someone kill themselves and we are completely powerless over being able to help, it's so important to connect. And how that is, if it's not 12-step and it's something else in a different way, like what you're doing brings people together. People connect with one another who otherwise wouldn't have connected, because we have a common ground. There's something going on that we can relate to.
Yeah.
And it's really, this path is not one to be walked alone. I walked alone for a long time.
I'm with you. I walked alone for a long time as well. So everything that you just shared, it was just bringing flashbacks again. And it is really, really good information to help more of our listeners understand a lot more, and I went and picked up Janan once. She had a weekend pass and she was at a recovery center, and she got in the vehicle and we're heading home, and she's telling me about some of the drama that happened. And being the good therapist that I am, I started telling her what she needed to do. And she got really upset with me. And she's like, can I stop you for a minute? Can I ask you, just please stop? And I'm like, okay, what? And she goes, for once. She used the effing word. For once, I wish you would effing stop being my therapist and start being my husband. And it hit me pretty hard and it hurt, because what do? We're nurturers. We're going to save them. We're going to fix them, which is a word Janan does not like. I still didn't get it, Jennifer. I still did not flipping get it. And we were in St. George a couple of months ago being videoed for our summit, and I was being interviewed, and I remember I started crying and sharing that story. And I said, where I'm at in our life right now, I'm finally able to be her husband, because now I have learned, and sometimes she still has to remind me. She's like, all I want you to do is listen to what I have to say. I don't want you to respond to it. Just let me say what I need to say. That helps me a lot. She has grown to know that this is how the proper communication should be. And it's really helped, because when you can sit there and stop and listen, instead of doing what we have done in the beginning, making the mistakes that we make being on the other side, to correct it and say, no, this is how you need to do this, because You've been on that side. I haven't. How the hell do I know how to fix it? Because I've not been there, but I think I do. So
Well, and I don't think even whether if you've been on that side or not, everybody's different. Everybody recovers differently. So giving advice, not saying you need to do this. It's just saying like, this works for me. This worked for me.
Yeah.
You could try this.
Yeah, exactly.
People are more open to that than kind of communication than having somebody tell them what to do, especially addicts.
Yeah.
They don't want to be told what to do.
When I was on that side, and for a long time, to be honest with you, I even questioned if I was, because my story didn't match a lot of what I was hearing. Because, when I would go to meetings, I mean, I would hear all of these like really heavy stories, of jail and all of this stuff. And I'm like, well, maybe I'm not, because, and again, and
I
it's so
laugh
funny.
because I've been there before.
Well, yeah, it's funny because I was looking for an Al-Anon meeting. This is many, many years ago. My kids were little, and I kept looking for an Al-Anon meeting, and I kept ending up in an AA. And the third time this happened, and it got to me where I introduced myself, I actually said, I'm like, I don't think I'm supposed to be here, and everybody broke laughing. I explain. So I just wanted to keep going, and that's when it clicked with me. That's why I was saying there's no stereotype. For me personally, I was a binge drinker. I could go for months and months and months, even maybe a year with nothing. But when I did, I had a goal in mind. Like, I actually would say, like, I'm going to so-and-so's house, or I'm going out here, and I was going to get obliterated, and I always achieved my goal.
You never let yourself down, huh?
Well, I joke around like it's hard. One of my things that I need to be more disciplined is following through, but that's one thing I always follow through on. If I set a goal, that was my goal. And also pills, but I did that in private. I did that, like nobody knew that. Also, nobody knew if I knew how much Benadryl to take, and to get to, because of what I wanted to do is I wanted to shut down, shut off. I didn't want to feel anything that was going to put me to sleep, anything I could pass out, until one day after a really, really, really bad binge, and I started coming back to myself. My kids were in the living room, and their TV was on, and one was coloring, and one was doing a model or doing something else. And it just clicked. I'm like, they deserve better. They just deserve better. And I just decided, well, I shouldn't say that wasn't it. The other part is that I actually had it with my now ex-husband and my mother at the time basically said, if you don't get your shit together, and my mother said, I will go to the court and I will file to have your kids taken away. And in that moment, and that was the moment that I was looking at my kids. And the first thought was, besides that they deserve better, the thought before that was, it'll be over my dead body that these two people are going to raise my kids, because I know, I was raised, because I didn't have a happy childhood, and at the time my marriage was completely broken at that point. So the thought of them being raised
by them.
So yeah, but you were right. Like, I had to find my way. And like I said, I've been in and out of 12 step. I have respect for the millions of people that it has helped. But I also know that when something has worn out its welcome, I'm looking to see, there's all different modalities of healing that I have been able to incorporate into my recovery, including like my own personal recovery of alcohol and pills, and then with my son. And I will say this, and I thank my son for this. He invited me to go to church in July. Actually, he was really excited because there was a celebrity guest speaker. And I don't know if you remember W.JORDAN from like the 80s or 90s. He sang the song, This Is How We Do It.
Yeah.
He was the guest speaker, which he left the music industry to become a pastor. So he's a pastor now, him and his wife. and they were guest speakers. And I've never like I still was in this, like, I've developed a relationship with God up until that point, and I was kind of trying to figure it all out. And I walked into that church, and what I experienced, I've never experienced before. And slowly, I just went to that last Sunday, this past Sunday, they had a very special event. They were doing a live recording of their first worship album. So basically, I went to a worship concert, which I've never done before, never experienced anything like that before. And it's contemporary Christian church, and I'm getting it. Like, I understand the message. Like, I understand. Thank my son for that too. So there's a lot to be grateful for.
Yes, there definitely is. And again, we all need our own paths, right? We have to take our own paths. We've had quite a few people on the show saying all the stories are the same, but they're different. And it is so, so true. I thought, even when I first started doing this podcast, I'm like, gosh, how long are people going to really listen? Because we're going to be having people talking about their addiction, and how many shows can we do about hearing the same people, different people talk about the same thing. But as we started getting further into it, I started realizing that comment is so true.
Mhm.
The stories are the same, but yet they're all different. And it's the journey that makes it different. And it's so cool. We have a good friend, Mallory Roosh, who I will have the honor with to share on the stage here in a week or so. But her book just got done, and I'm going to give her a little prompt here, and it's called Inspired to Recover. And when you hear Mallory's story, at age 19, she was getting ready to be sentenced to prison for quite a long time. And it had to do with her heroin addiction. And a gentleman broke into the courtroom and went up and talked to the judge. And long story short, anyway, this ended up being her as a probation officer, right?
Mhm.
Sometimes I get the two confused, but probation officer. And she messed up. And she went in to go see him, and he pulled out a piece of paper, and she's like, "What are you doing?" And he's like, "I'm writing a letter to the judge telling him, guess I was wrong. I screwed up. You don't want to get well. So you're going to prison." And she broke down and started bawling. And this gentleman he was a pretty big guy. Unfortunately, he has passed. But he got up and slammed his hands down on the desk and said, "What is it that I got to do to get you to realize that life is worth living, that you're worth it?" And she said, "I don't want to be forced into recovery. I want to be inspired into recovery." And that's why she named her book Inspired to Recover. And she has a phenomenal story. I mean, she really, really does, of what this one person did to save her life. And again, it goes back to all our different journeys. And even us on the other side, we have to go through our journeys.
Yeah.
Al-Anon wasn't a fit for me. I have an aunt that went to Al-Anon. She loved it. It worked great for her. It just wasn't a fit for me, and it's okay. We all have our own way to go through what we're going through. And you touched base on it quite a few times, Jennifer. We can't go through it alone. We need a higher power or something greater than us, just like the person who's battling the addiction. We all need that same power, whatever it is that you want to believe, whether it's God, the universe, a rock, a goldfish, a mountain, whatever it may be. Believe in something that is greater than you, because it really will help you get through it. And you also touched base on it. Surround yourself with the same type of people that are going through what you're going through, because they do understand. And the reason why Al-Anon wasn't a fit for me is because what they were going through and the way the meetings was being done, it wasn't inspirational for me. It wasn't therapeutic for me. I would walk out of there more angry than I was before I walked in. And wished I would have known at that time of other ways to reach out to people and ask for help, because it does get us down a very dark hole. So
I agree. And I guess, Al-Anon worked for me for the time that it did. And at the same time, what I started to do is, you mentioned the book, and her name sounded familiar because when I went to your Facebook, I saw her name, or you were sharing something. And so I've been kind of investigating her myself,
yeah.
because I also, I'm in the middle of writing. I've been wanting to do this for a long time, and I just started writing my story, as well. Not my, meaning my own recovery from alcohol, but the other side is being the mother of an adult child addict, how I put the pieces together, how I found peace. That's kind of going to be the focus. But what I ended up doing, just kind of what you were sharing, connecting with other people. What helped me is that one night I could have easily started a blog, and I didn't. I ended up starting to use my Instagram as an online diary, and I just started writing and putting pictures, because I'm very visual too. And I did not care if anybody read it or not. I just needed it to get out of my head. And so I just started posting, about my son and the addiction, and as a parent and all of that. And I was floored by the response that I started to get. And that's not the reason why I did. But then I realized, like I said, there's no accidents. God works in mysterious ways.
Yes, he does. And sometimes he puts us through some pretty bad storms to get us to where we need to be.
I was going to say, sometimes that's what it takes.
Yeah. Well, guys, let's stop for a real quick commercial break, and then when we come back, let's wrap this thing up. So I'm going to ask you what you have, just so you can be prepared. What do you have that you feel would be very beneficial for our listeners? Something that would help them or inspire them. So, guys, stay with us. We'll be right back.
Good morning, this is Leticia with Computer Hospital. We are your computer repair experts for both PC and Mac. We are your community resource for all of your computer repair needs. What makes us different is that we want to fix your computer. We also do free diagnostics. We charge a flat rate labor, which means that you won't pay by the hour. All of our computer repair is done in-house with a fast turnaround time, and same-day service is also available. Feel free to stop by anytime without an appointment. We're located in Sandy at 8721 South State Street. Again, that's 8721 South State Street, or call us at 801-987-3993. Again, that's 801-987-3993. This is Leticia with Computer Hospital, and we look forward to seeing you soon.
Hello there, this is Brad Neufeld with the Resilience Talk Network, and I would like to introduce to you Taffy Town, one of our newest sponsors. Let me introduce you to Derek.
Hi, I'm Derek from Taffy Town. We're proud sponsors of the Other Side of Addiction podcast. Taffy Town is a family-owned and operated business still operating in the Salt Lake City area for over 100 years. We manufacture some of America's best saltwater taffy.
What makes Taffy Town stand out from all of the others?
We have a unique recipe, a whipped-style recipe that incorporates egg whites, evaporated milk, real sea salt. It's a unique product that is flavorful, melts in your mouth, and the best part is we probably have a flavor for anyone's liking, a flavor for any reason, for any season. We have unique flavors like chicken and waffles, maple bacon, frosted cupcake. New this year was a pineapple ghost pepper flavor.
That's awesome. Where can people find out more about Taffy Town and all of its products?
You can check all of this stuff out. All of our products are available for sale on taffytown.com. We ship for free from our website, so all of our pricing on there is shipping included. Oftentimes we offer special promotions and discounts to our loyal customers, so do be sure to sign up for an account, and we look forward to seeing what we can do to make you smile with our taffy.
Where are you located?
We are currently located at 9813 South Prosperity Road in West Jordan, Utah, just at the foothills of the Copper Canyon mine.
Derek, taffy has always been a great gift to give. What are some of the creative ways Taffytown can help say thank you to others?
Yeah, if you're looking for gift ideas, whether to say thank you to friends or family, or maybe to your clients after such a difficult or successful year that you've had, you could look no further than to get a gift idea from taffytown.com. We offer pre-packaged gift boxes that say that it's saltwater taffy from the city of the Great Salt Lake, and it tells a little bit about the history of our community and making candy for so long. You can also do customized gifts to pick out just the right flavors or colors of candy for that special someone, and deliver even a personalized message in that box to them. So please feel free to check out taffytown.com for any gift ideas this season.
Thank you so much, Derek. Please visit taffytown.com. That's taffytown.com to find out more about the products and services that Taffytown offers. You won't be disappointed.
Do you know someone who's gambling with death due to an addiction? Do you know someone whose life is being turned upside down due to a loved one that's battling with addiction? Hi, I'm Al Richards. I am the host of the Other Side of Addiction podcast. I started the podcast due to my wife's battle with alcohol. Let's just say I became addicted to her addiction. Our podcast is helping people understand a little more about those who have battled addiction and those who are hurting from their addiction. Through raw vulnerability, we share stories that help uncover the root causes of addiction. Shame felt on both sides, matter of the conscious and subconscious mind, continued beliefs, and often confusing paths of recovery. We collaborate with real people and their stories, as well as licensed professionals, to help our audience gain a better understanding of addiction. You can find us on Resilience Talk Network. You can also find us on Facebook at Mr. Al Richards. That's Facebook at Mr. Al Richards. You can also find us on YouTube. Just look up the Other Side of Addiction podcast. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Other Side of Addiction. Again, we are here with our special guest, Jennifer, and my lovely wife, who is the co-host, Jeananne. Oh my gosh, Jennifer, and I say this at every show, this has been such an incredible show, and what you've had to share has been so special and so inspiring, and I am so grateful and so blessed, again, that we had an opportunity to chat. I'm glad that you found us, or however it worked out, so we could get this message out, because you have an incredible message to get out there, and anything we can do to help you with that. And there's some people I want to make sure at the end of the show that I get you in connection with, because they are great, great people, and they're willing to help because they've all been in the addiction, and now they work in the recovery type, and they're doing things differently. They're not doing it the normal way like a lot of recovery centers are. So thank you again. Is there something that you want to leave our audience with, whether it's inspirational or a word of advice or just a suggestion?
As when you post that question to me, the very first thing that came to my mind is to share with others, or for those that this message is meant to hit. Please understand that what you are feeling is normal, that you are not crazy. And it's to start opening up find someone, whether it's a trusted family member, a friend, like I said, a grief counselor, no matter what, do not suffer in silence. Because the one thing, and on my Instagram, I end this with every single post, you deserve peace.
I
That's
love
what
it.
you deserve peace. Just like those who are going through, who are in active addiction and now in recovery, is the same thing. Deserve peace.
Yeah. That is really good. I love that.
Me too.
Is there something, hon, that you have that you want to
No,
share before we sign off?
nope.
Okay. Again, Jennifer, my gosh,
Where
thank
can
you.
people find her?
Thank you so much. Yes. And how can people find you? Thank you for bringing that up. How can people find your Instagram page and reach out to you? Because I'm sure we have some listeners that are going through some things, or if they don't have support, guys, right here she is.
Absolutely. I'm in transition with the things that I'm creating, but the one way that a person can reach me is on Instagram. The handle is Midlife with Jenny. Jenny is spelled with an IE. And that's exactly what it's about. It's a combination, the 4 pillars of health, but that's where I've been talking about the ambiguous grief and all of the things that have worked for me. And even if it's someone wants to connect with me because they, like you said, reach out, I'll talk. Don't be afraid to reach out to me. I want to be there for others because I really do want to give back to what has been so freely given to me all these years. And now it's time to give back. But there are things in the works. I'm in the middle of writing a book, and there's things that I'm working on. So you haven't seen or heard the last of me yet.
I love it.
I hope not.
And to make sure I got it right. So this is your Instagram account, and it's Midlife with Jenny, JENI.
And
Correct?
JENNIE.
yeah.
JENNIE. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Awesome. Jennifer, again, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, such a privilege to have you on with us today. And again, we just want to say thank you to all our many sponsors, all our listeners. None of this would be possible if it wasn't for you. So guys, thank you so much for all your love, your kindness, your support, and believing in what we're doing here. And thank you to Brad, Resilience Talk Network, for opening up your studio to allow us to come in here and do this, and for me to have my therapy session. The only difference is I get to, instead of laying on a couch, I get to be interviewing some awesome people. Remember, addiction is giving up everything for one thing, and recovery is giving up one thing